For 7 years, I believed that if I worked harder, stayed loyal, and became the person everyone called when a crisis exploded, eventually someone at Northbridge Health Advisory would notice. But on a rainy Monday morning in Chicago, that belief finally collapsed when my director, Marcus Hale, summoned me to a glass conference room and calmly announced that the newly created executive strategist position had gone to someone who had joined the company only 9 months earlier. I stared at the congratulatory email glowing on the screen while Marcus talked about timing, organizational fit, and future opportunities, and although I had heard those polished phrases before, this time I noticed something different. The promotion wasn't simply being taken away from me. It was proof that the company had already decided what I was worth, regardless of how many impossible deadlines I had rescued, how many clients I had retained, or how many younger employees I had personally trained. I walked out of that room expecting anger, but what I felt was strangely quiet, almost like the silence after a fire alarm stops ringing, and when the newly promoted employee, Jenna Cross, passed me in the hallway wearing an enormous smile and carrying a box of champagne glasses. I congratulated her sincerely before returning to my desk and opening a blank document titled, "What Happens If I Stop Waiting?" I had spent years believing loyalty was an investment, but that afternoon I began to understand that loyalty without recognition can become a prison. So instead of sending another desperate email asking what I needed to improve, I wrote down every skill I possessed, every major client relationship I had built, every process I had repaired, and every problem people brought to me because nobody else knew how to solve it. That evening, I met my older brother Daniel at a quiet diner outside the city, and after listening to me explain everything over 2 cups of terrible coffee, he didn't tell me to quit or give me some motivational speech. He simply asked, "If they offered you the exact same job somewhere else tomorrow, would you still want it?" The question followed me home because I realized the answer was no. And for the first time, I separated my fear of leaving from my actual desire to stay, deciding that I would spend the next 4 months preparing for a future that didn't depend on Marcus, Jenna, or anyone else finally deciding I deserved a chance. The next morning, I stopped chasing approval and started collecting evidence of my own value, carefully rebuilding my professional portfolio, reconnecting with former colleagues, studying the healthcare operations market, and documenting the results of projects I had completed without taking confidential company material or sabotaging a single client relationship. At the same time, I noticed something Northbridge's leadership had overlooked for years. Many of their clients trusted individual advisors more than the corporate brand, and although I refused to poach anyone while I was employed, I began asking myself a completely different question: what would happen if I built a company where talented people didn't have to beg for permission to be recognized? 4 months later, the answer arrived unexpectedly when a major hospital network called me during my lunch break because their Northbridge project had fallen dangerously behind schedule, and after I helped stabilize the situation through the proper company channels. I wrote those words down, not as a promise or a secret business deal, but as a reminder that the trust I had spent 7 years building belonged to my reputation. And that night I registered a small consulting company called Meridian Bridge while quietly creating a financial cushion large enough to survive 6 months without a paycheck. Then Northbridge made the mistake that finally pushed me toward the exit. During an executive presentation, Marcus presented one of my operational strategies as his own, received applause from the board, and afterward told me privately that I should be grateful for exposure. Marcus read the letter twice before looking up and saying, "You're making an emotional decision." But I shook my head and replied, "No, Marcus. The emotional decision was spending 7 years hoping you would change. This is the first decision I've made based on what I already know." Because suddenly people discovered that the person they had repeatedly overlooked was the one who understood why certain systems existed, which clients were likely to complain, which reporting tools had hidden weaknesses, and how several complicated projects were actually being held together. Marcus asked me to stay longer, then offered a retention bonus, then proposed a promotion I had been denied, but I thanked him each time and refused. Because the most satisfying part wasn't watching them panic, it was realizing that none of their offers could purchase the confidence I had finally built for myself. 3 months after leaving, Meridian Bridge had 4 clients, including one organization that had independently contacted me after my departure. And I was earning more than I had ever made at Northbridge while working fewer hours because I had designed my business around clear boundaries instead of endless emergencies. I hired 2 people who had also been overlooked elsewhere, created transparent promotion criteria, and made one rule non-negotiable. Nobody working for me would ever have to guess what they needed to accomplish to advance, because I knew exactly how damaging it was to keep moving the finish line after someone had already crossed it. Then, almost a year after I left, Jenna contacted me through LinkedIn and asked whether we could meet. And when we sat across from each other in a small cafe, the confident woman who had once carried that champagne box looked exhausted as she admitted that Northbridge had become chaotic. Several senior employees had resigned, clients were complaining, and Marcus had started asking everyone why the company no longer felt like it used to. She eventually looked me directly in the eyes and said, "I thought you were just bitter when you left. But now I understand you were the person keeping things together." And I didn't celebrate her confession because by then I had learned something more valuable than revenge. Sometimes the greatest proof that you were right is realizing you no longer need the people who doubted you to admit it. 2 years after that rainy Monday, Meridian Bridge had grown into a respected firm with a team of 18 people, and one afternoon Marcus called me with an offer so generous that the old version of me would have considered it a dream, promising a senior executive title, enormous compensation, decision-making authority, and even a partnership if I would return and help rebuild Northbridge. I listened until he finished, then thanked him sincerely and said, "There was a time when I would have given anything to hear you say those words, but I don't want to return to the place where I learned to doubt myself." And after hanging up, I looked around my office at the people who trusted me, the company we had built honestly, and the opportunities that once seemed impossible, finally understanding that my real victory was never making them regret losing me, it was becoming someone who no longer needed their approval. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.